Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're continuing my quest to create another extraordinarily powerful archer build by combining two of the game's strongest builds into one brutal whole. This character outputs extraordinary damage turn after turn, while providing some of the strongest, most reliable, and most spammable crowd control in the game. On top of that, we only need short rests in order to refresh our resources, so you can long rest as little or as frequently as you like with this build and fit it into any party, and we provide excellent utility through skills and spell support to our party as well, making it one of the strongest additions to an honor mode party available. Before I begin, I do want to take a quick moment to say thank you so much to AKEK for the €5 donation, Devin Cantola Bosch for the $5, Wanda Husbando for the £5 twice over, so £10, and Alexander Spragle and Alito123able for becoming channel members. Thank you so much, my friends. I really do appreciate the support. It really means so much to me. Alright, let's pincushion some enemies. I'm using Astarion as the example character because I think he's the most on-flavor companion for this build, and also his unique mechanics make him the most powerful choice for creating this character. We're going to be making so many attacks that Astarion's bonus to his hit chances in the early game, and his extra damage if you take the appropriate story path in the late game, will just be applied so many times with this character that he will increase the damage output of this already extremely powerful build to an extraordinary level. If you're building this as a custom character, then what race you pick mostly doesn't matter. We're going to get all of our weapon and armor proficiencies from our levels anyways, but you can pick something like Wood Elf or Half Wood Elf for extra movement speed, or Dwergar for the out-of-combat invisibility for a significant mechanical edge. Githyanki also give you Misty Step and better skill access through their astral knowledge, so you can be an even better party face playing as a Githyanki. And Halfling's ability to reroll ones is always incredible for any build that's rolling as many dice as this one. At first level, we're going to be starting with a level of Bard. This will let us get our skills online as early as possible so that we can act as the party face and as the lockpicker for the party, because we will have all of those skills available right from the beginning of the game. If you have those roles covered elsewhere, you can play this character as a pure fighter up to level 5, before taking Bard levels for a little bit of extra combat prowess in the early game, but the level of Bard is really helpful to your skill progression and sort of out-of-combat progression throughout the game, so I prefer to start with it. For our cantrip selection, we are looking for utility cantrips that will help us do our job better, so we're going to go ahead and take Friends, so we can be an even better party face, and Minor Illusion. As an archer, this is especially valuable, especially because we have some AoE attacks with our archery abilities. Since Arcane Archer gets those, you can use Minor Illusion to group enemies up before combat starts, and then unleash a barrage of AoE attacks on them, killing entire encounters immediately. For our spell selection here, we are going to be playing with lower charisma than most bards do, but we can still take some offensive spells for the early game. One lower save DC definitely does matter, but having Dissonant Whispers is just such a powerful tool anyways that I really like having this in the early game. It can make you much better at locking down melee enemies, especially ones with low wisdom saves, and then killing them with your arrows because it prevents them from moving thanks to the Frightened. In addition to that, of course, we're going to take Healing Word, a great utility spell to have always, and Heroism. Heroism is actually an excellent spell to concentrate on for ourselves in the early game, and you're going to see part of why in just a second. This character is going to have a fairly low wisdom saving throw, and so we need ways to become immune to common wisdom targeting effects. One of those is Frightened, so having Heroism to target ourselves means that we can become immune to Frightened and just not have to worry about having a low wisdom save. And of course, we can also use it to buff up our tank. 5 temp HP every turn is really powerful for longer fights, and we won't be concentrating on anything else anyways, so this is a pretty nice spell to concentrate on. Our last spell will either be Longstrider, if you don't have that elsewhere in your party, because that's a very important utility spell to have. Sleep can be very good for the early game. It can win you some encounters outright against low HP enemies. And Tasha's Hideous Laughter will be very, very relevant in the late game. So I'm going to recommend just grabbing Longstrider just to make sure you have it in your party, but you can take one of the other two if another party member has it, or if you're getting it from a camp caster. For our attribute selection, we're going to be taking an extremely unusual attribute split. I think very few of the hundreds of builds on my channel have used an attribute split like this one. So we're going to be taking 16 starting dexterity. Of course, we're an archer build, so we want our dexterity as high as possible. And 14 constitution, because that's kind of the minimum to have the hit points and everything so that we don't die. In addition to that, we're going to be taking 14 in intelligence, because this will be the key attribute for our arcane archer abilities. And while we'll be increasing our save DCs dramatically, we still want these to be as effective as possible. And 14 in charisma, because that's how we use our bard abilities and be the best party face possible. You can take 12 charisma and 12 wisdom. But the extra point in charisma is valuable both for our skills and for the save DC on our bard spells, and for any spells that we might cast from scrolls or items. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but basically charisma will be our casting stat for items. So having 14 charisma helps out a lot. This gives us one odd point that we can stick pretty much anywhere. Into wisdom, for example. If you don't like the odd point aesthetically, like you just hate seeing odd numbers, then you can make it disappear as if by magic by doing this. And then you end up with a build without odd numbers. But obviously, that's just if you hate the odd number aesthetically. Finally, for our skill selection, this character can be both our lockpicker and our party face, so we get to just pick all of those skills. I do recommend taking stealth, because having stealth access is going to be very helpful as an archer, so I might take a skill selection that looks something like this. With Astarion, with his perception, deception, and sleight of hand from his background and race, you also get all of those already, so this is an excellent skill selection, but the most important ones to take are sleight of hand and persuasion, so that this character can perform those skills for your party. +4 to persuasion is fine for the early game, and we'll get skill expertise later on, so that will give us a very high persuasion check and allow us to be the party face through the entirety of the game. Finally, of course, as a bard, we need to pick the right starting instrument, otherwise we're going to ruin our entire playthrough unrecoverably, so make sure you get this right, and then let's move on to level 2. At character level 2, we're immediately leaving Bard and taking a level of Fighter. This makes us much better at archery immediately, because we get our namesake archery fighting style. We also get medium armor and shield proficiency, which is excellent because this can increase our armor class enormously, especially in the early game. Having a shield equipped while using a bow is totally possible in Baldur's Gate, so we can have the highest available armor class at this stage in the game, while also still outputting tons of damage from ranged attacks. Archery fighting style is the most powerful fighting style. This is the largest bonus of all the fighting styles, and is one of the major draws to being an archer in the first place, is basically no other method of combat gets a tool as powerful as just a flat +2 bonus to your hit chance, so it makes you incredibly more reliable, and is an incredibly powerful tool. We also get the self-heal, which can be useful under some circumstances, but mostly we're here for archery fighting style, martial weapon proficiency, and the armor proficiencies. At character level 3, we're taking our second level of fighter and getting Action Surge. Now, I don't need to talk too much about this ability, it's the best ability in the game, and I've said many words in praise of it in the past, but it's worth noting for this character that we are using it at its fullest potential. We make so many attacks with each of our actions that having Action Surge increases our burst damage tremendously, and because this character only uses short rests to replenish its resources, we're going to be able to use Action Surge very frequently, because we're going to be short resting to get our other resources back. That will recover Action Surge. Everything will tie to the same resource, so we'll always be at our fullest capabilities in every single combat. At character level 4, we're taking our third level of fighter and taking Arcane Archer. That's right, this is an archer build that actually uses the archer subclass, and gets us the extremely powerful arcane arrows. These are some of the best crowd control tools in the game, because they're applied just with your attacks. So the more attacks you make, the more often you can apply them, and the more reliably you can use these abilities. with our Arcane Archer level, we also get a cantrip, so we're going to go ahead and take Guidance, which makes us even better at being the party face and lockpicker. We can now provide this awesome bonus for ourselves, even if we're like scouting ahead of the rest of our party, disarming traps and stuff. And we get 3 Arcane Shots. Now there's one that we're always going to take, and then for our other 2, honestly, the other 7 Arcane Archer arrows are all incredible, so I'm going to recommend some that I think are the strongest, but you should really feel free to build whichever ones that you want in order to get the playstyle that you want to achieve, or based on your party members. I'll talk about each of them a little bit and the 3 that we're going to take, but I will also mention that all of these are excellent, so it's really hard to go wrong whichever ones you pick. The first one, of course, and the one that we're always taking, is Banishing Arrow. Banishing Arrow is absurdly powerful. This is a 4th level spell, normally, and it's a pretty good 4th level spell that you get just as an attack. So it also does damage, only takes part of your action once we have extra attack, and can be spammed over and over again because it only takes a resource that you have a lot of that's refreshed on a short rest. So Banishing Arrow is an incredibly powerful tool, especially because we'll be able to increase the save DC on this ability significantly. The second one that I recommend taking is Seeking Arrow. Seeking Arrow always hits, and having anything that just does automatic damage without having to roll to hit is incredibly strong in Baldur's Gate. You can finish off low health enemies with it and do all kinds of additional cool tricks with it. It doesn't work with Sharpshooter, and it doesn't work with every on-hit effect in the game, but just having a weapon attack that can't miss is absurdly powerful. So Seeking Arrow is one that I wouldn't leave home without. It also, because it targets like Magic Missile, it basically casts Magic Missile but with your bow instead of with a missile. It can target around corners and through tiny gaps in walls, things that you can't normally draw line of sight through. This just gives you an incredibly reliable tool, so you can always use it. And finally, we're going to take Piercing Arrow, because this gives us an AoE attack with our weapon, which is always an extremely strong thing to have. It also automatically hits, or always does damage, to everything within the 33-foot line that it shoots in. And so you can use it to finish off low-health enemies, hit groups of enemies. Remember, I talked about Minor Illusion to group enemies up to use Piercing Arrow. It doesn't work with every kind of on-hit effect in the game, but is still an extremely, because it doesn't roll to hit, but is still an extraordinarily powerful tool to have an AoE attack with your weapon. It's actually funny, the tooltip for Piercing Arrow is wrong here. It says they must make a saving throw or be dealt an additional 1d6 piercing damage, which is really funny because that used to be how this arrow actually worked, but at the time when it worked this way, the tooltip said they had to make a saving throw or take half damage. And then they changed the tooltip to describe the way that the actual ability used to work, but changed the ability to work the way that the old tooltip works. So how it actually works now is they have to make a saving throw or they take half damage from this ability. But they have reversed the tooltip to describe the old behavior of the ability. It's very confusing, but basically it's an AoE attack and they get a saving throw for half, just as if you were casting a fireball or something like that. Other great arrows include Bursting Arrow, which is a wide AoE. I think Piercing Arrow is generally a better AoE effect, but Bursting Arrow has its uses, and being force damage is pretty nice. Enfeebling Arrow is a pretty powerful debuff, so definitely worth having for some boss fights. Grasping Arrow does the most damage of any of the arrows, so can replace any of these pretty well. And Shadow Arrow has the best debuff other than Banishing Arrow. Honestly, Shadow Arrow is excellent. Blinding enemies is really good for the advantage, but the existence of Banishing Arrow does make this one a little worse, even though it's like the second most powerful of these arrows. The only one that I wouldn't usually take is Beguiling Arrow, unless you have a Glamour Bard in your party who needs enemies to be charmed. But any of these 6 arrows in the last 2 slots are good. These are just the 2 that I recommend most highly. Next, we are taking our 4th level of Fighter to get our first feat, and like pretty much every archer before us, for our feat, we're going to take Sharpshooter. We have Archery fighting style, and several of our several of our attacks don't roll to hit. Now, Sharpshooter doesn't work with Seeking or Piercing Arrow. You don't get the extra 10 damage because there's no attack roll. But just the existence of attacks that don't roll to hit make Sharpshooter even better than it already is, and it's already the best feat for every archer. Not only is this an incredible amount of additional damage, but when we get enemies low, we have very reliable tools for finishing them off, so we don't have to like turn off Sharpshooter and make higher to hit chance attacks. We can just guarantee that we hit when we need to. So this ability is even better than it usually is, and it's already an absurdly powerful tool for archers. 10 extra damage on every single attack, and we're going to be making tons of attacks every single turn, is just so much, so it will increase our damage output to an enormous extent. At character level 5, we're taking our 5th level of fighter to get the aforementioned extra attack. Extra attack is obviously one of the biggest power spikes in the game for any martial character, but especially for this character, where our attacks are so powerful. This is an attack that can be a fireball using Piercing Arrow, or an attack that can be a level 4 banishment spell using Banishing Arrow. So having extra attack makes us so much better at applying crowd control, in addition to doubling our damage output. One of the themes of this character is not only do we get all these really strong abilities, we use these really strong class features to their absolute maximum, because not only are we just doing a bunch of damage with our attacks, we're also applying extremely powerful crowd control, buffing ourselves up, debuffing enemies, spreading hazardous terrain around the battlefield with our items. So extra attack, action surge, and abilities like that are always top tier abilities are even better for us. But what's better than 2 attacks every turn? Even more attacks every turn. So, for our 7th level, we're going to take a 2nd level of Bard so that we can get our Sword Bard abilities. This also gives us Song of Rest at Bard level 2, and this character is entirely short rest based, so the fact that we can give ourselves an additional short rest means that it increases this already very high longevity character to be able to just go and go and go and go. In pretty much any adventuring party, you will never be the one to run out of resources first, and you add extra resources to your party members as well, so you make the whole team just way better at continuing to fight. For our spell selection at this level, we can grab a utility spell or Tasha's Hideous Laughter. This is a really nice enchantment crowd control spell that we can use with the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel, which is something that this build has very easy access to. So this is a really nice one to have for locking down late game bosses. There's also a surprisingly few enemies are immune to this, even if they're immune to other forms of crowd control. So it's really good for that as well. Then, at level 8, we get to take our Bard subclass, and of course, that's going to be the College of Swords. This gets us the flourishes, which give us Slashing Flourish, allowing us to double up on our weapon attacks. Now, you can't use Slashing Flourish and an Arcane Archer Arrow in the same attack. You can't use those two at the same time. But basically, if you think of this as an arcane arrow that doubles your damage, you can see why it's just so good. Now we can remove enemies from the fight with Banishing Arrow, we can automatically hit enemies with Seeking Arrow, we can AoE down groups of weaker enemies with Piercing Arrow, and if we just need high single target damage or to spread out lots of damage over 2 enemies, Slashing Flourish lets us do that. It's one of the best abilities in the game and part of some of the very strongest builds in the game for a reason, and even more so, it will allow us to build up Arcane Acuity charges, which will make our Arcane Archer abilities even more reliable. So if we want to use Arcane Acuity on this character, we're even better at doing that now. A very common play pattern is going to be to use a Slashing Flourish, and then with our second attack, use a Banishing Arrow to remove the most threatening enemy from combat, or often multiple of the most threatening enemies from combat, because Slashing Flourish will have just killed them by making 2 attacks. We also get a fighting style here, and we can take 2-weapon fighting. This means that if we're using a pair of hand crossbows, we'll usually be using a longbow for this character, but there are some points in the game where a pair of hand crossbows might be your best available weapons. Then we get even more damage with the offhand, and it also just gives us, if we do that, we get a bonus action attack for more damage and more acuity charges, so might as well take this. We're not using dueling anyways, so this is just free advantages. We get a level 2 spell as well, and we're going to take Hold Person. although this won't be very reliable with just 14 base charisma, again, we have the option to use Arcane Arcane Acuity to buff our save DCs, so Hold Person becomes extraordinarily reliable crowd control for fights where it's good. We also get Expertise in 2 skills, so we can take Persuasion Expertise and Sleight of Hand or Stealth Expertise. If we're doing Stealth Archery, if we have an ally who's casting greater invisibility, Stealth Expertise is game-breakingly powerful, so obviously excellent to take that. Sleight of Hand Expertise can just make us even better at picking locks, so now with Expertise in Persuasion and Sleight of Hand, we're covering all of the needs of our party out of combat pretty much single-handedly. No need to replace spells, our spell selection is perfect, but if you do want to replace one of the lower level spells with another level 2 spell, Invisibility is good, Cloud of Daggers is still relevant even this late into the game. There's some good options, but for the most part, you're very happy the way you are. At character level 9, we're taking our 4th level of Bard, which gets us an additional cantrip, and, more importantly, an extra feat. For our feat selection here, we're taking an ability score improvement to buff our dexterity. At this point in the game, 16 in our main combat stat is starting to, show its age, so we really do want to increase our dexterity in order to hit our attacks more often. Up to this point, you can use the Graceful Cloth or the Gloves of Dexterity in order to hit your attacks more reliably, so it won't be particularly punishing in actual play, but increases to our dexterity increase our damage and accuracy, so obviously are what we want. We also get a cantrip here, so we're going to take True Strike to annoy people in the YouTube comments, and an additional level 2 spell. For more utility spells, you can take things like Enhanceability or Invisibility for out-of-combat tools. Invisibility is really nice to have at any point, so I'm always happy with that. Crown of Madness is also another crowd control enchantment spell, which can be pretty useful for this character as well. Now, for the last 2 levels, we've had to be a little sparing with our Sword Bard abilities, with our flourishes, because our inspiration dice only came back on a long rest, so we didn't have that many to use per day. But with 5th level Bard, we get Font of Inspiration, so can refresh our inspiration dice on a short rest, allowing us to be much more aggressive with these extremely powerful abilities. So now all of our resources, except our spell slots, but we don't use those that frequently, come back on a short rest, making this character able to just keep going and going and going, while also outputting enormous amounts of damage. We can now much more easily have a play pattern where we just want an enemy dead. So we, for example, use 2 slashing flourishes with our first 2 attacks, action surge, use another slashing flourish. That's stacked arcane acuity to maximum, and then we banish an enemy with a banishing arrow. Or we can do 2 slashing flourishes and then 2 banishing arrows in order to remove 4 enemies from combat basically immediately. So we always start combat with multiple of the most dangerous enemies on the field no longer on the field at all. We also get 3rd level spells, and Hypnotic Pattern gives us another spell that we can use with a Band of the Mystic Scoundrel cast. This one lets us remove lots of enemies from the fight. So one of the only things this character was missing was the ability to deal with lots of weak enemies who aren't grouped together enough for Piercing Arrow to kill them. Hypnotic Pattern gives us a tool for that as well. So we pretty much have no weaknesses in almost any kind of encounter. We have a tool for every possible type of enemy that we might face. Now, for normal Sword Bard Archer builds, you go to level 6 in Bard, because that's when Sword Bard gets extra attack. But we already have extra attack from Fighter, so we don't need level 6 in Bard. That lets us take level 6 in Fighter at this point to get an additional feat. And then we're going to be able to hit level 7, which is when Arcane Archer gets to really start spamming its abilities, because you get even more Arcane Arrow dice. At this level, we get an additional feat, and of course, we're just going to max out our dexterity. Getting to 20 dexterity gives us initiative, armor class, and additional attack and damage. It's the best stat in the game, and we get to max it, so yet another advantage that this character has. If you're using a lot of story events to increase your dexterity, Alert is still always incredible. This character will have solid initiative, +5 certainly isn't bad, and we'll get a couple more points from our gear almost certainly. But Alert is still always excellent and will let you go before even the fastest enemies in the game. Any enemy this character goes before won't get a turn because you'll just kill them or banish them. So going first is really important. Alert is still incredibly good, even on a dexterity-based character like this one. Finally, at 12th level, we're taking our 7th level of Fighter, which gets us 3 more uses of Arcane Arrow every short rest, so we have 7 uses per short rest, letting us use these awesomely powerful abilities even more frequently. We also get Magic Arrow, which mostly doesn't matter, we're going to be using a magic weapon, and Curving Shot, which can let you re-roll your attacks. It's sort of like pseudo-advantage. I still have not found that this ability is very reliable. It bugs out pretty frequently, but when it does work, it's really nice to be able to use your bonus action to effectively make an extra attack whenever you miss. For our Arcane Shot choice at this level, we have a bunch of really solid options again, though I would usually pick between Enfeebling Arrow. Enfeeble can be pretty useful in some late-game boss fights. Having enemies only do half damage with their weapon attacks is a really strong debuff to some late-game bosses. Almost nothing is immune to it as well, so it works on pretty much every boss in the game. And a lot of late-game fights are just pure damage races, so getting twice as long to kill the enemy before they kill you is great. Or Shadow Arrow, which is the one that I'm going to recommend. Because we have our Sword Bard abilities, or flourishes, we do so much damage that Grasping Arrow is a little bit redundant. It's usually the one you pick for damage. And Shadow Arrow will let you hit an enemy, gain advantage on attacks against that enemy because they're blinded, and then burn them down with tons of damage from your flourishes. So if you just want something killed, this is often the best way to just get advantage, and it's a pretty powerful debuff as well. So I'd choose between these two, though again, it's really hard to go wrong with these Arcane Arrows, so pick whichever ones that you think are best for your party and for your particular playstyle. Alright, my friends, that's the build, and I hope that it helps you in your honor mode runs, just shooting enemies full of holes and then locking them down without any hope of retaliation. But of course we can make this character even stronger with items, and it gets to use some of the best items in the game to the maximum potential, so let's talk about those. 4 items for this character. We have access to a ton of brokenly powerful combos, and we use them all incredibly well. So the real goal here is just to see how many broken item effects we can stuff into a single character. I'll take you through each of these in order. We're going to start with our weapon. For our weapon, there's 2 main tools that we can use, or 2 main setups that we can use. Either the Titan String Bow, which adds extra damage equal to our strength, plus an elixir of strength, like this Cloud Giant Strength, or in the early game, a Hill Giant Strength Elixir, which will increase our damage per shot tremendously. That's an enormous amount of additional damage, and will be the highest damage setup possible throughout the entire game, basically. So in the early game, this is the strongest setup, and in the late game, it's the highest damage setup. Now, in the late game, I tend to prefer swapping to the Deadshot because later on, we don't actually care that much about our damage per shot. We care more about just hitting all of our shots because we have so many broken effects tied to attacking with our weapon and hitting our shots. So the dead shot's extra accuracy, bonus crit chance, and everything I tend to prefer, but either of these 2 setups are excellent. If you just want sheer number of attacks, you can also go with a pair of hand crossbows, and this build does have 2-weapon fighting, and those can either be the Hellfire hand crossbow and the Nair Misser if you're not using the ballast armor to double your piercing damage, because the Nair Misser is not piercing damage, or it can be the Hellfire hand crossbow and just a +2 hand crossbow if you are using the ballast armor. Speaking of the ballast armor, this is one of the most powerful items in the entire game. Enemies within 10 feet become vulnerable to piercing damage. They will often be hit by a hold person and thus be taking automatic critical hits as well, so you'll be quadrupling damage to enemies within 10 feet of you. So you can get absurd amounts of damage by wearing the ballast armor. All our damage is piercing pretty much, so this will effectively double all the damage that we do as long as we're able to move up close to enemies. In the early game, you could use the Graceful Cloth. It takes us a little bit of time before we get additional dexterity, so the Graceful Cloth can really fill that role, and you can use Mage Armor from an ally to still have decent AC. And if you want a more defensive setup, the Armor of Agility gives you good saving throws, which are one of this build's very few weaknesses, and also higher armor class, so you can have a more defensive setup. The Ballast Armor is brokenly powerful offensively, Armor of Agility is better defensively. We also get to benefit from the passive abilities of melee weapons. Even though we're mostly going to be attacking with our ranged weapons, though you can still stab someone if they get too close, and it makes sense to do at the time. The melee weapons that have passive effects will improve this character's ranged attacks as well. Things like the Knife of the Undermountain King can give you increased chance to critical hit, so this will be an incredibly strong tool just to be holding. And Rhapsody is amazing for this character. Attack rolls, damage boosts, and spell save DC increases everything that we do. Spell save DC increases do affect your Arcane Archer abilities, so +3 from that for Rhapsody means that your Arcane Archer abilities will land extremely powerfully. Another good option is to have a shield, and I would recommend the Sentinel Shield, because extra initiative is really good for this character as well. And you can combine that with the Armor of Agility to have really strong AC. With this setup, you have 24 AC, which is higher than a lot of other characters get, even without any other defensive tools. And that makes you very, very hard to kill, combined with decent hit points and the fact that you're fighting at range. You can make this a very safe character as well. Another broken combination that we get is the Helmet of Arcane Acuity and the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel. Every time you attack with a weapon, which we do often multiple times per attack, because when you use a Slashing Flourish, it will trigger Arcane Acuity twice. We can boost Arcane Acuity, and then we can use bonus action casts for casting things like Hold Person or Tasha's Hideous Laughter. And this will also boost the save DC on our Arcane Archer abilities. Arcane Acuity, every stack increases your save DC by 1, so enemies will not be able to resist your spells if you're using this combination of tools. So we get yet another brokenly powerful combo in Baldur's Gate 3. Another really sick combo that we get is the Drakethroat Glaive plus the Snowburst Ring. Now, how this works is that the Drakethroat Glaive can enchant any weapon with an elemental damage type, in this case, cold damage. So we can enchant our bow with cold damage, and then you can use the Snowburst Ring. When every single arrow that you fire creates a circle of ice under enemies, and the ice circles will use our item save DC, so they'll be affected by the Arcane Acuity stacks, and enemies will fall over more readily on these Snowburst Rings. We can cover the entire battlefield in extremely dangerous, hazardous terrain. An enemy that's on an ice surface has to make a dex save or they fall prone. If they fall prone on their turn, they lose the rest of their turn. So this gives us free stuns with every single arrow that we fire. The one downside is that you need to be careful with fire damage around this, because it will melt the ice surfaces. But this ability is just so strong that it's worth doing that. Speaking of fire damage, for our glove slot, our goal is to increase our damage output. So we have a couple of choices. In the early game, we're going to be using the gloves of archery just for extra damage with our shots, which obviously are very important to us. And then later on, we can swap to anything that increases our damage per shot, like the Helldusk gloves. Now, because these do fire damage, they do conflict a little with the Drakethroat Glaive and Snowburst Ring combo. You can still just use both, it's fine. Or you can use a different set of gloves. Another set that I really like is the Martial Exertion gloves. Every attack that you get is so valuable for this character, and you're pretty hard to kill, because you're far away, you have high armor class. Enemies will often be dead before they get to take a turn, so taking the extra damage mostly doesn't matter. This will allow you to make extra attacks, so you can bring down enemies even faster, do extra crowd control, and even more powerful options. Another good glove option is the Luminous Gloves. If you're using the Callous Glow Ring, this can do extra radiant damage, and then the Luminous Gloves can mean that you stack radiating orbs for even more debuffing on enemies. So another option if you want a more defensively focused character. Speaking of rings, we just want to increase our damage output with rings, unless if you're using the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel and Snowburst Ring item combos, then obviously those are going to be your ring slots. If you're not using these, if you find Arcane Acuity cheesy, or you have these on another character or whatever, then you just want to increase your damage output. We're usually going to be concentrating on a spell, so the Strange Conduit Ring is just an extra d4 of psychic damage. And another really good option for us is the Ring of Free Action. This character's one weakness is that we have a very low wisdom save, so enemies can paralyze us easily with hold person. Ring of Free Action prevents that, so makes having a low wisdom save much less punishing. Finally, it's worth mentioning that this character can benefit a ton from stat replacement items. Because our attributes were a little multi-attribute dependent, because we want both intelligence and charisma, our attributes are a little tight for this character. So having the Gloves of Dexterity or the Headband of Intellect to replace our stats here can allow us to increase our attributes more. Now, the Headband of Intellect obviously conflicts with the Helmet of Arcane Acuity, one of the most powerful tools, which is why I don't recommend using it usually. But if you're not using the Helmet of Arcane Acuity, then this is a great option, and in the early game, it can just increase the save DCs on your Arcane Archer abilities enormously. In the late game, also, we get the Amulet of Greater Health, which will let us move these points from Constitution elsewhere, so we can boost our Charisma to 16 and Wisdom to 12, drop our Constitution down to 8, and just wear the Amulet of Greater Health in order to allow us to have high hit points while still having really high stats in every other ability that we need. We can also, because we are an Arcane Acuity build, we can use scrolls extremely well. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that charisma is our casting stat for scrolls and items, and you might be a little confused because we took Bard first and Fighter second. The game only swaps your casting stat when you take a class for items, when you take a class that has a casting stat, and Arcane Archer does not, the game doesn't consider it as having a casting stat, so it will still use charisma. If you don't understand anything I just said, don't worry about it. The important thing is that your scrolls will be cast with charisma. And you can use effects like Scrolls of Hold Monster. You can bonus action cast this with the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel after making a weapon attack in order to lock down enemies even more effectively. So this is one of the best characters in the game at using scrolls, items, illithid powers, and so on in order to lock down enemies. The most powerful possible endgame setup, we're just going to be using as many of the broken combos as we can. So we're going to have the Helmet of Arcane Acuity alongside the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel for bonus action casts of spells like Hold Person, the Ballast Armor to double our damage output, and the Martial Exertion Gloves in order to do additional attacks. We'll also be using the Snowburst Ring alongside the Drakethroat Glaive in order to add ice to every one of our attacks, and the Amulet of Greater Health, you would respec your stats in order to have higher attributes in Wisdom and usually Charisma, though you could increase your Intelligence as well. For your Cloak and Boot slot, you can just use pretty much any defensive or utility setup. The Cloak of Protection can fix your saving throws a little, and the Disintegrating Nightwalkers give you Misty Step, which pretty much every character wants, so you can use those items as well. We also are going to be using Rhapsody for even more hit chance, damage, and spell save DC, and the Knife of the Undermountain King or the Bloodthirst Dagger to increase our critical hit chance, though you can also use the Sentinel Shield if you want even more initiative. And the Deadshot just for the most accurate and highest chance to critical hit, most accurate attacks, and highest chance to critical hit on every one of your attacks, and then make sure that you have stacks of Scrolls of Hold Monster in addition to this setup. So this is my recommendation for the most powerful endgame setup. I will say this is overkill. This will trivialize Honor Mode if you use all of these items at once, so you may want to refrain from one or two of these combos to keep the game more fun, but this is the most powerful way to build the character in the endgame. Finally, I should mention that this character uses illithid powers extremely well. Favorable Beginnings and Luck of the Far Realms are always awesome, and Ability Drain is excellent for this character also, just giving enemies even more disadvantages as you continue to hit them with attacks. So this is one of the best characters in the game for illithid powers because you increase your save DCs and you make weapon attacks, so you use both sets of illithid powers, again, to their fullest potential. Alright, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this build, and I hope it helps you brutalize Honor Mode. If you have enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a comment and hit like. Helps me out with the algorithm, so I appreciate you taking the time to do that. And of course, you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 build guides and other strategy game analysis. Cheers, folks. I'll catch you next time.